As architects and designers, we can be conscious of the way we design. Design in a way that once you have achieved what is needed for the building to function for its purpose, make it such that it can only be completed when nature embraces. When we think about what human development means, it takes me back to some of the simplest buildings that had occupied our landscapes in our part of the world for hundreds of years. I'll show you a little townhouse in which I begin to integrate nature, so building itself with this pier. And that's why I keep saying generosity when I started. It's such an important part of sustainability. It's really a privilege and pleasure to be here this morning. Of course, I wouldn't be talking about anything that's measured. I'm an architect, a designer. So it's very likely to talk about what we can dream of. If there's something that we need to go into the future about being sustainable and be collective in our part of the world in South Asia. We must realize that when basic needs have been met, human development is primarily about being more and not having more. And I think it was touched in the first presentation that in fact what we are so concerned about these days is about having. And that having is not just only about the measurable values, but it's often our own goals. We want to have bigger equals. We want to sort of be seen and recognized, all of that. That's a human instinct. But often if you step back and think about it, we can simply be more without having all exact legs. And I'm not saying I'm like that. I'm not a kind of thing that I say, but I strive to be that. And I think when we think about what human development means, it takes me back to some of the simplest buildings that can occupy the landscapes in our part of the world for hundreds of years. And this is an umbrella or wayside resting place, the very, very simple building. But that one building, which encompasses the idea of shelter for all of human beings, is also an act of generosity. These buildings are built by the community for people who don't even know. And simply pass in the night, perhaps stay there for a minute, and they might be gone the next day. But it has a community that sort of creates the capital that is spoken of this morning without even thinking about it. And this has been a tradition in our part for centuries, and in fact, thousands of years. And you will see it all across Asia. These are examples I've just picked up from Wikipedia most of the time. And you can see all of these, and there are 3 or 4 examples from Sri Lanka, something really very, very simple. For instance, just attached cottage to someone to sit in. That's a more sophisticated version in a city in Sri Lanka. That's in Iran. That rather beautiful run across in a paddy field in the middle of Sri Lanka. All of these are acts of generosity by the community that allows us to share our benefit. And often, architecture is one of the biggest culprits of pollution and unsustainability, because we use enormous resources as designers, and we draw those resources out of the earth. Where else do we get it? We take it from our environment and often forget to give it back. And that's something I need to talk about. I mean, sometimes building the simplest structures that last for a long time might be the best way. This is a chapel of a school that I went to when I was a kid. It's just a open building. Although it is a place of worship, it's also this extraordinary building that can become community center, it can become community. And the day it ceases to be a church, it's still made of stone. It might survive to become something else. And we've seen this happen over and over again in our buildings. But here, in 1920, when the two fathers decided to build a church, they decided to build something that was almost like it's not a church. It's just an open building, which goes back to those ideas of generosity. Anyone can come and take shelter in these spaces. And this is not, it doesn't go without sort of being not in contemporary architecture. In this wonderful photograph I saw on the internet is where the workers in Hong Kong gather in a public space under the back building in Iran. Of course, unfortunately now I think they're not allowed to do it because Saudi sort of has put down the sort of barriers. But this act of generosity by an architect, let's have an open space that people can gather. And these wonderful Sunday gatherings of these people in these tiny spaces in Hong Kong, to be able to come and share their thoughts and their ideas and their lives with each other is an act of generosity, which I think the corporate world can well afford to do. There are many people who do that, and recently I was in Hong Kong, the new museum in the glass also has the same act. One of the lovely things about going there one early in my morning was to see all the old aunties doing their Tai Chi under the shelter of what is essentially a public space. And I think as architects and designers, we need to be thinking more about this idea of generosity through the works that we do. I know it's sometimes hard as architects to convince some of our clients that a little bit of extra space out there might actually generate more capital. Like I keep coming back to your talk, sir. More capital through this and bringing people together. And sometimes we just don't. Open it up, bring people in, and share part of the wealth, not your money, but just a little bit of space that might help people, not just to share them, but also meet others. And through that process of dialogue, create a better world. We can talk about, gosh, it's so hot, what do we do about it? And you can only do that if you meet another you. And humans are like that. We need to meet each other to understand our needs. And one of the things that I also want to touch on is connecting these buildings and our environment around. At the Channa Hotel, which was the first project I worked on after graduating as an architect, I saw how the architecture developed and received a big generous donation. The building was seen as a structural frame to welcome back the jungle that she had already intruded on. Of course, here he was, Capital's shareholder company there, and they were going to build a hotel to extract more money from the tourism industry. But we was going to decide, okay, if I'm going to build this in a place where nature is going to be disturbed, how can I create a structure that can allow nature to come back? And years later, about 20 years later, in fact, about 10 years after we finished building, and a gentleman was already quite ill, he had a stroke, he couldn't speak. When I took him to the hotel, he began to see when nature was taking over the building. And as I remember him putting his feet down in the air and bursting into tears, because he had seen what he wanted to happen in that occurred. Now, of course, the building is almost disappeared. The building doesn't have the form that all of us architects talk about, the sexy kind of buildings that we always want to come in front of everybody. Here is the building, let us announce something else to take over, to complete it. So it is the sense that we as architects may think they're gods, but sometimes it's nice if we allow another god take over and complete the ones that they start. And every morning, whenever I stay in the hotel, it's lovely to walk up the windows and see somebody's and monkeys, you might see lizards, and you can see all those animals sort of hanging about in a building that somehow remains all of this not building. So to embrace the environment would be for me the first piece to decide what a consciously sustainable future for us upon. This might mean that it might be a conscious effort to repair some of the damage that we have done worried about. And we on our little island have done the damage over the years. Perhaps not as many not in many other places, but like other places, but we have. And on the left-hand side, you see some of the sort of clearing that has gone on in the alternative forest areas in Sri Lanka, but some of the most beautiful parts of the world, I'd say. But of course, we have not been conscious of what they're doing. And of course, there are efforts. And that effort might simply be to an advantage of training. So the major thing to do, just allow the training grow on its own. And we have the monsoon, count the monsoon that a tree can grow. And sometimes we call the word very things like years, but all we need to put into being in this is the simplest act. And I think that's something that we need to remind ourselves of. And of course, here is a sort of speech in which the Wildlife and Nature Protection Society of Sri Lanka is sort of picking up little bits and pieces of land that they connect what they call wildlife corridors. And there's a concerted effort on part of the community to start reconnecting wildlife corridors, re-establishing the forests, and then hopefully into the future have a much wider natural set of connections that will allow the nature to flourish away. Because what's happening in Sri Lanka, of course, is especially in the high country, is that our tea plantations, which had been a mainstay of the economy, the colonial economy, I would like to say as well, and that is now being abandoned because it's not profitable to run plantations in the way it is. And all those abandoned lands it's very difficult to bring the forests back. So people have decided, let's do it ourselves. And there are small communities that have become doing it. I wish more people did it, but it's lovely to see something like this, so many trees planted, trying to make the connection so that leopards might go from one path to another and other animals will move about it. And we might begin to repair what the damage that can occur. Same is happening with our man. And very recently, Sri Lanka was given an award by the United Nations for the amount of mangrove replanting we have been doing. And it's lovely to see communities do that, knee-deep mouth, going to how planting this tiny little thing, to see sort of then beginning to flourish. And those efforts are something that we need to multiply, not the little bits and pieces that we're doing. So repairing nature could be a first step towards us beginning to understand what's going on. As architects and designers, I can be conscious of the way we design. Designing the way that once we have achieved what is needed for the building to function for its purpose, make it such that it can only be completed when nature embraces. And this is a little lesson I learned from our when you build Kapila, where you allow nature to embrace it complete. That thing. We can make it about being more and not having more, as I said before that. That's our last. And so here we are at the Kama level, and this is not the new idea. Just south of this country is a wonderful building done by Balakrishna Toshi, one of the greatest Indian architects, the Indian Institute of Management. He created a structure, very simple structure that allows nature to take over. 1974. It's not like yesterday. These are ideas that have been part of our community in many years and gone unnoticed. It's lovely to have seen this on the cover of AD magazine recently because there was an effort to create an understanding of how gardens work. And then of course here in Japan, 1995, of course is a more recent building in Singapore. So those ideas that I sort of showed you at the Kandalava is now slowly taking a foot. Here on the right-hand side, Costco Verticale, if you want to know it. But in Little Sri Lanka, there's Clear Point Residency built in 2017 that's giving the same thing, allowing nature to subvert your own ego and take on the image of its own. And of course, there's lots of other ideas that come in for vertical farming and so on, where a form of a building is not what we determine, but something that happens because of nature taking over, because of agriculture taking over. That's something else other than art. So there's really sort of desire for fame and fortune and making sexy buildings takes over to become what they are. And I'm imagining cities like this in the future. Can you imagine if all our cities ended up being like that? As again, a crazy picture you saw in the internet. And I imagine if everybody built every building like a Kandalam, you have a city like that. And I'm sure you've seen all these pictures. But I think we need to be conscious when we look at these things and see what we can do in a small way to achieve the future. I was fascinated by this simply because it's at my own work in tiny ways. I'm showing you a little townhouse in which I begin to integrate nature. So the building itself will disappear and nature takes over, the animals come. That's a very simple building. It's entirely open to the outside. Committee was talking about the inside-outside idea. We can afford to get rid of walls in many parts of the suburb. There are parts where we can't. And that's where we need to bring technology in to deal with that separation of inside and outside. But in many parts in other subcontinent, we can. And then, of course, the question I get asked every time people come to my own home, for instance, this is my dining room, I eat outside, who want no mosquitoes? I say, look, I had a couple of rooms I can shut, and I know that mosquitoes start between 5 and 8. My dinner parties are after 8, and I shut myself during that time. We need to adapt. We need to adapt to the environment. We can't sort of want to have the best at all times. And there are cycles in the world which we need to respect. And part of that is what it is. So again, my own house, I lived in a little way, I live what I'm talking about. I do shut some of the windows at 5 o'clock and I did open them and enjoy the environment of course, Sri Lanka is a special place, so you want to say as it is when you live in Sri Lanka. We can put in many parts of the subcontinent. And I think we need to be conscious of how we can achieve this as in many places as possible. And I talk little bits and pieces of how we can go into the future with this kind of work. And that's another sort of hotel building in which I tried to put the landscape in the center of it. So this is, I started by designing the garden and then came the hotel. And the hotel rooms are very simple, very basic. And that's fine because what you do have is this extraordinary landscape that's slowly taking over this hotel that was built about 4 years ago. And that's an earlier project I did. Again, the buildings are not fancy. They just get taken over by the landscape. And for me, one of the best examples of this is in a house that is lived in by a friend of mine called Amina Ginel. She was in Jeffrey's office as well with me, a very close friends. And here she is really living that moment when nature is not a place to visit, but you make it home. It is indeed that. It is a home by friend Amina, and it's in a inner circle of. And what's lovely is that every part in this house is recycled from an old factory. The main frame of the house is an old factory building. The windows are all from a tea factory that had been abandoned and broken down. The bricks are recycled from building site. Everything here is really, and then she's allowed nature to simply take over. What's lovely, of course, being in this place, I can begin to see the beginning of reusing this beautiful factory and using this as a resource. And I think every bit that we use of resources from the past means we are saving other things for our future extraction from nature. And that should be why the principles that we work with. How we keep as much as we can of what we have here doing that in the past. Now to do this, we should be conscious to take as little as we can from the above. To do this, we need to take a look at materials, which we inevitably must go back to get, but we can enter, but to make the least change. One is, of course, picking materials that can be renewed, the very basics of natural materials, and plan in ways that you don't have to change your ways. Now, often as architects, we kind of try to do, so we first talk about materials, renewable materials. I mean, these are not renewable. This is a building made of stone. Once you build it of stone, hopefully it's built in a way that it can be used for a much longer period for many different things. If it's built for a church at the moment, it's fine, but later on it can become something else. It can become a community space. But if you build it solid, with solid materials, then you don't need to extract further from that. And you'll see this, the reuse of these buildings all over. You can see this when temples become mosques, mosques become temples and so on, but the material remains. And it's made beautifully so you can recycle. In this case, it's a modern building in China in which everything that's broken down in the towns in China have been used in the China kind of arts in this extraordinary building, which simply piles up rubbish and creates a building out of it. We haven't had to put it into a landfill. And I think, of course, it does look very beautiful, but it's not as maybe sexy as, say, other people might want it to be. But here we are, creating with materials that have been had. And that's a lovely picture again I saw on Wikipedia. It's entirely of recyclable brick. It doesn't mean that reusing materials means to compromise your aesthetic sense or create something that's little. It's a tiny little church that's built entirely recyclable. And it's possible. Of course, the material now begins to get used in lots of other buildings, and there's of course recycled wood. If you use it in bits and pieces that's usable for the future, then you can begin to use it. So these are houses in the US, and of course there are plans for the future to even make skyscrapers. And I think as a renewable material, timber is extremely good. Unfortunately, in our part of the world, we have put so much restriction on timber cultivation because of exploitation that has gone on in the past. But it's time that, for instance, the social capital of rules and regulations are brought into bear so that something from nature that's renewable and good for the environment can be taken in the future. Today, if I tell any one of my friends in India, shall I use timber? Oh my God, Channa, it's so expensive, it's impossible. And that's because the industry has not been helped. One of the most important building materials for renewable architecture is not even possible. because our rules and regulations have become lax and nobody is interested in changing that. And I think it's important that we as architects and designers push for some of these things with our governments and with our leaders. And of course, in the rest of the world, they're going forward to try and create these extraordinary buildings. Because someone says, oh, you can't build a tall building in wood. Why not? Because they're doing it elsewhere, and we can begin with staring at people there. And my own way again, I'm recycling bits and pieces of wood. That's a staircase that I built in Portlander. And here in Africa, I'm recycling wood and reeds to create the outer sort of skin of a small sort of guest house that I built. All this is reeds taken from Lake Victoria, with the estate borders on the edge of that lake. And it took a little bit of convincing, oh, but Channa, it won't last. 15 years later, they're still there. And I said, look, natural materials are some of the things that will actually last. And everyone believes that if I build something in concrete, that's forever. But trust me, it's not forever. Just 5 years ago, I had to completely demolish a building that's above I had built, which had a concrete frame inside, and it had rotted from the inside. It was a beautiful building on the outside, and the inside I got, and it's not a solution. So we can look at natural materials a little bit too positive and don't think that the answer is concrete. Then I think we can beginning to get somewhere. And this recycling of timber happens here in my own house. A series of old wooden shutters from a factory, from a hotel that was broken down, came up on the market for next to nothing. I was very lucky. And of course, I managed to wrap the whole thing, my whole house, in it. And that works on nicely. And of course, another material that we have easily is plastic. Right? A lot of people probably go to Sri Lanka to these wonderful, beautiful beaches. I'm sure a lot of my Indian friends do come to Sri Lanka. It's just what a wonderful time we had. Yeah, I mean, that's gorgeous. But that's what we have on our beaches today. And I'm not casting blame here, but much of this is actually from Burma and from India. Floating across the Bay of Bengal, much of the plastic that we are so unconsciously throw into our rivers, it is up on what is essentially what looks like a beautiful beach, but that's really the reality of it. But it's an extraordinary material that can be reused, and people have begun to do that, and I just thought this was fascinating. It's recycled plastic. It's supposed to be a hotel, it's going to be a hotel in the Maldives, and it's by an American architect, and it's all recycled plastic. And I think it's necessary that we begin to think of those issues as well. Perhaps we can start in simple ways like this year in Colombia. They're beginning to use little boxes or packages of plastic to create walls and make forts. An important material that we have, not natural, was extracted out of the earth, and instead of throwing it at the oceans, we must begin to use it. I'm sure out there in this very call, there are people who are thinking about these things. It was allowing to walk through all of those innovative ideas, which I'd love to go back and look at. And I'm sure they're thinking about it, but that's the easily available material today for us to think of reusing it. The other thing is about how we plan. Often as architects, we want to do these sort of sexy buildings. And we sort of, twist and turn our spaces, and so on. But if you decide to plan it in very simple ways, and this I learned in architecture school where I did a master's many years ago at Barton School, that you can plan to make things work better. To start with, at the moment, Sri Lanka has a coconut crisis. Now, the basis of all our food is coconut. If you've been to Sri Lanka, the food is delicious only because everything has coconut in it. And today, from a coconut being 80 rupees about 2 months ago, has now gone up to 200. So now that's nothing to do with the economic crisis. It's two things. One, this is what's happening to most of our coconut plantations. They get subdivided to make homes. Everybody wants a house on their native plot of land. So coconut lands get exploited and buildings happen. Lack of planning. People are not thinking that in the future they're going to lose what's going to happen, lose the production of these lands. And the second thing, of course, was we did have a rather stupid president who decided to bring organic agriculture overnight. Coconut plantations couldn't be fertilized. I'm not saying inorganic fertilizer is good, but it needed to happen soon. So they just simply stopped putting fertilizer, and a coconut tree shows what it's doing only 2 years down the line. So 2 years ago, there was no fertilizer, we don't have coconuts. 250 rupees yesterday get a death penalty. So people are like freaked out. What is the government doing? This government can't do anything about it because somebody did something earlier. Lack of planning, bringing up of land becomes one of the big issues that we have. So that's the lack of planning. And then you have kind of, so there's also this issue that in the end, the colonial exploitation of the landscape, purely for profits. Again, I go back to this talk first thing in the morning. Purely for profit, you're only thinking of how many grams of tea can I sell in the market. Let's get as many as possible. So we cover entire hillsides with tea and rubber and coconut, which was the mainstay of Sri Lanka's economy for a long time. But today, it's all slowly falling apart. And what we are not doing anymore is planning to think of what will replace it. And again, this is applicable to a large part of India, particularly to peninsular India and the south. And that's really about how you re-establish. It's not like, we were poor and didn't have anything before the colonial state. We did well. And that life came from the land. And what we have forgotten that, in fact, in Sri Lanka at least, the Candian home garden system now beginning to be looked at by experts in agriculture, is that people didn't have the unique properties. They had these extraordinary situations in which there were layers of planting. So the same land had 4 layers of cultivation. You had the tall trees, the jackwood, and the mangoes. We had mahogany and other timber trees that they would fell to make your houses. At the middle level, you had the cloves and the nutmegs, the spices that you always wanted, and you could also sell in the market and get a little bit of money to establish yourself. And right at the bottom, you would find the crops like turmeric and ginger and coffee, bits of tea, and so on. So that's a classic way which our forefathers in the subcontinent cultivated our land. They didn't cut every tree down and plant one kind of crop to get as much money as possible from that one kind of crop, but you had 4 layers of production. And I'm sure this is much more sustainable and probably might, on the whole, if not bring more sort of wealth personally, but perhaps might bring less equal as you could get if you had another kind of cropping system. And also look how actually beautiful it is. Just simply the aesthetic of the Candian forest garden is better worth pursuing if you want to create an environment that is much more sustainable. So sustainable doesn't mean that something has to be terrible or look terrible. It can be actually good. The other point I want to make, as I'm coming down I think to the last 18 minutes of my talk, is that the greenest building, it was told by one of the candidates of the American Institute of Architects, the greenest building is the one that already exists. Because we are not going to have to exploit the earth to make it, because it's already there. And that I think is quite an important point. And to make those buildings last for longer, I'm just showing this rather kind of almost mechanical sort of set of diagrams. But what I want to show you is that if you build a plan which just has those 9 squares, they all look the same. And you think, now, that's very boring. But if you think about the simple way in which you open and close your doors, can create different types of buildings. And that chart shows you how different the spaces are when you look at it from the perspective of what spaces overlay others. So for instance, in this first example, you will have a door here and a series of doors that goes round, and therefore you have a completely different experience of that space because you're going space one after another. And for humans who use space to connect with each other and do things, that's one way of doing it. You can have a much more closer kind of building where everybody can meet each other in a central space. Same block of buildings. And this is much more interconnected. And you probably have people meeting each other more often if you had a building like that. But it's again on the same thing. By simply building something very timeless and solid, and all you have to do is open and close your doors, you can have a building last for much longer. not simply as a single-story building, it can be built as a multiple-story building, but I think we need to plan so that buildings don't need to be knocked down. Because I've always believed that somebody builds something with a lot of hope. It's the one profession, I must say, as architects, it's the one profession that people come to when they have hope. If you are in trouble with your taxman, you go to the accountant. If you're in trouble with your health, you go to a doctor. If you're in trouble with your, and so on. With the law, you go to a lawyer. But you don't come to an architect when you're in trouble. You come to an architect when you have hope. Now, when you build with hope, I think it's necessary that it's built for a long time. And once something is built, I find it really rather rude that you knock it down. Because it's somebody else's hope that you're knocking down. And it's also embedded energy from the earth that is in that building that we're knocking down. So I just feel it's important that we plan, and that's how, when you have those simple plans that last forever by opening and closing doors, that you get some of our most beautiful townscapes. Here in Kyoto, here in Yemen, even New York City, there's a consistent urban scape that comes out of creating buildings that will last for a longer time, but they can be used for different purposes over time. And that's down in China, in Hangzhou, which I had the pleasure of, in Suzhou, which I had the pleasure of visiting recently. Absolutely gorgeous towns. And we admire them, we go around and say, how beautiful is this? But it happens because somebody built in a way that generations of occupants could actually use them by simply opening or shutting a door. And I think to plan that way to the future is something that we need to try and do. So the classic sort of London townhouse. I mean, I'm sure there are officers, accountants' offices there, architects' offices there, some people live there. Again, simple plans, by simply opening and shutting doors, you can begin to reuse them in ways to suit your purpose. And continue to have this built capital and embedded energy continuing into the future. And of course, again, beautiful townscapes. Now, here's an example, of course, in Australia, where a tall building, really rather a dull-looking tall building, has been recycled and added to become something far more exciting in the recent past. Now, if you plan, you can actually do these things. You haven't had to break down this entire tall building, and we've seen so many buildings being blown up because, somebody has, in India, I think it was somebody had broken the rules, and the whole building was broken down. Now, could there not have been a negotiation that all that embedded energy in that building could have been saved because somebody said, okay, let's compromise. And there must be generosity on both sides. And that's why I keep saying generosity when I started. It's such an important part of sustainability. We need to be generous to each other. And that's where we begin to prosper as a community. And here are examples where you can see an old building that could have easily been blown up. Somebody's made an effort to compromise and create something that's actually even more beautiful. In my own little way, I've done a lot of work that is in conservation and in recycling. This is a 18th century building in the port city of Gaul. It had been a governor's residence, then it became an orphanage, then it became a chicken coop. When we finally took it and said, well, maybe it's a reasonable place to stay, and then it was made into one of Gaul's first boutique hotels. It's called the Dutch House, and that went on for 20 years because I did this in 2002, and in 2012, I think, the gentleman's taken it, and he's cleaned up what I had done, and he's now living in it as a home again. 300 years of various things happening, from chicken coops to homes to children's homes to whatever, but the same old house, having the same old principles of simple construction. And I believe what you can do to sustain and keep what is already human capital, what is already embedded energy, and all of those things should really be done by us. A little bit more concerted effort on the part of us architects to do that, and designers to do that. And these are little projects, and of course people say, well, the 50s, horrible time, not nice architecture. But recently, this is a house in Colombo. I thought it was terribly sexy to have this at this house. I was very proud. They came to me, Channa Daswatte demolished it and built a new house. And I said, absolutely not. Look at that staircase. You can't build that staircase today. It'll cost so much to do that. So I finally managed to convince them that no, you can live in this. And we cleaned it up, and of course it's now a family home.
it had been an office and something else in the last 40 years. But it's just about saying, seeing through what is there and saying, look, you can do something else with it. And I think it's a really gorgeous house. And of course, they moved it recently. And one of the last things I wanted to show you was this house, which has this extraordinary history in eastern India, in Orissa, a little place called Ramba, on the coast of the Chilka Lake. And so that's how we found it. The roof had collapsed. They had just put some steel sheets on it, slowly crumbling. The family had moved, and it belonged to, it's a wonderful story of an East India Company official who overstepped his mark and built a palace for himself. Then he was called back to the court of the East India Company in Leadenhall Street, told off, thrown out of his job, and then the British government didn't know what to do with it, so sold it to the local Raja, who took it as a sort of holiday home for his hunting, because it's one of the greatest migratory locations for the migration of birds in India. And so obviously he would have had some fantastic shooting, so he used it as a little shooting lodge. And then of course, lived in his own palace. Over time, it deteriorated, and there you are. That's how we found it. And that was the beginning of our conservation. It took us 6 years to slowly do this process, because we got INTAC involved, they told us what to do, so we went through the whole process of getting it going, and then finally kind of managed to get it to something like that. And I really think all of these energies that are embedded in our building and our construction needs to be thought of. That's why I was very inspired walking into this space. It's wonderful to see how these factories that were built with different hopes and different ideas about profit and all of that being used in a completely different way in today's context, where you're going to begin to share what you can under these roofs to go into the future. So that's really what I wanted to talk to you about, this idea. And it's a series of disparate ideas. We talk about it all the time, but I thought let's remind ourselves of what we should be thinking of when we are thinking of design and architecture into the future. So thank you very much for listening to my rant, and I hope you get something out of it. Thank you very much.